My name is Jim. I'm a musician in Nashville, and I've made videos this year trying to figure out what the deal is with electric guitars, sustain, strings, scale length, amps, and cabs. One thing I learned is how much impact the choice of guitar cab makes on an electric guitar's tone. And after doing hundreds of tests, results pointed toward the size and shape of the cab and the specific speakers mattering a lot. So when I saw this on Nashville Craigslist, I freaked out a little bit. What is this? Some beat-up knockoff cab? No, it's a Bogner 212. Why doesn't it say Bogner on it? Well, it looks like the logo fell off at some point. Why is that worth freaking out about? Well, I do know of one guy who uses a logoless Bogner 212.
Here's where my cabinets are, in that room there. I got two old Bogners, one's open back and one's closed back.
That's Tom Bukovac. He's a Nashville session player. He's played guitar on a lot of hit songs. But to be fair, Bogner is a pretty popular company. Anyone could own a Bogner 212 and have the logo fall off at some point. It'd be pretty ridiculous to jump to conclusions that just because it's a logoless Bogner 212 for sale in Nashville that it had to be Tom Bukovac's, unless the very next listing was for the other Bogner cab that Tom also had brought to sessions. Okay, so Tom's selling some gear. Tom buys and sells a lot of gear.
I was looking around and I started thinking to myself, Lord, I have got so much gear.
It seems like he changes things up every few years.
I need to sell some of this stuff because it's all great stuff, but I'm not using it.
So no individual piece of gear he has owned could really be credited with being a through line in Tom's sound on all of the hits he's played on, unless...
Now, what cabinet do you have hiding?
I've been using the same cabinet for 20 years, an old Bogner 212 with Celestion 65s, the old 65s.
Right.
White label. I love those.
Why would Tom sell this? Maybe because after you play on over 1,000 records, you just use whatever. And I don't doubt for 1 second that when Tom shows up to a session, he's going to sound amazing plugging into whatever. But for the past 20 years, he didn't plug into whatever.
I've been using the same cabinet.
He plugged into this.
It's an old Bogner 212.
And because it's a speaker cabinet, this has its own sound. So intentional or not, this sound was on 1,000 records and some of those ended up being really popular, to the point where my first job was playing covers of them in a bar band in high school. So to the extent that any piece of music gear can have historical significance, I think this does. Contacted, convened, purchased. So can anybody get a Bogner 212 and some white label 65s and have this cab sound? Well, maybe, but maybe not. As far as I've seen, when it comes to frequency responses, meaning the bass, middle, and treble, guitar amps have pretty simple curves. Guitar pedals have pretty simple curves. Guitar cabinets have messed up jagged squiggles. And even the same model speaker doesn't always share the same messed up jagged squiggles. So if there's one piece of gear in the whole guitar signal chain that has the potential to be unique and hard to copy, it's the speaker. When I learned this, I took this seriously enough to figure out which cab was used by my favorite guitarist, Nashville session player JT Corenfloss, on my favorite music, and I made a copy of it from scratch, including finding the same model speaker made 1 week before his Utah in 1967 and testing 10 different vintage 30s for one that came close to the same frequency response as his. So that's what I use. I have my copy of JT Corenfloss's session cab from 2001, as well as JT's actual custom cab from 96 and JT's actual custom cab from 07, and now Tom Bukovac's session cab for the past 20 years. It feels pretty cool to take a tube amp and plug into one of these. And it's probably not surprising that I don't use amp modelers anymore and haven't for a long time. I used to have a Kemper, and I think it was a useful tool for taste testing a bunch of different styles, but once I got a better idea of what I liked, I got the real thing and have played actual amps through actual cabs since. But this Line 6 pedal I use for delays does have the ability to model amps and cabs. Maybe if for some reason I'm stuck on a gig using this instead of a real amp, it'd be cool to be able to make it sound as if I was going through one of the JT cabs, or the Bukovac cab. It'd be cool if I could just capture the sound of these cabs and load them into the pedal. And from what I've read, I can do that. I've never messed around with these before, so I don't know how well it works, but there's something called an impulse response that can take any cabinet's EQ curve, make it into a small file, and then pieces of modeling gear like the Line 6, Fractal, Kemper, whatever, can load that EQ curve, and theoretically, it'll sound like you're playing through that cab, but no real-world noise needs to be made. That's not what I usually do, but I could imagine situations where that'd be convenient. But before I do anything with Tom's old cab, I wonder what he thinks about digital modeling.
Not my style, you know, I'm an amp guy. I like the old amps and tubes and speakers and things. And microphones, that's what I do.
Oh, yeah, of course, me too. I was kind of afraid he'd think I was silly for talking about...
People acting silly, talking about comparing Kemper profiles and stuff like that.
Oh.
No one is asking about Kemper profiles, so I know my fans are cool. All right. Here's another question I got from an old friend, actually, a guy that I've known for years. He said, Tom, I remember one time we were drinking beers in a bar and you said, and I quote, "One day we will look back on this era of guitar players playing all these modeling amps the same way we look back at old photos of ourselves wearing stonewashed jeans back in the 80s. And then you went on to say, if a state law was passed where guitar players were only allowed to use Kempers and Fractals and no real tube amps, then you would just quit guitar." You remember saying that? I would never say something like that. I mean, you must have me confused with somebody else.
Okay, guitar is the main thing I do in life, and Tom's one of my guitar heroes, so the last thing I want is for him to see this and think I'm lame for taking a piece of real analog gear he used to own and make fake digital models.
Another guy said, "Hey Tom, just saw an advertisement that offers a Kemper rig pack of your amps named as Tom Bukovac rig pack. Is that really your stuff, or are they just using your name only?" I'll tell you the whole story on that, just so you know. My buddy Ford, Third Power Amps, they wanted to borrow some amps to use for the Kemper profiling thing, and you know, I'm not a Kemper guy. I'm not a user. I said, no problem. So that was a long time ago, actually. So any of you guys that use that stuff, go on and do it.
All right, I guess I'm making some impulse responses. I've never done this before, I don't know how well this works, so I tried my Real Deal old Fender head into each Real Deal session cab, and at the same time took a direct out to Pro Tools that I could simply put an IR on with a couple clicks. Then I put the audio of the real cabs and the audio of the IRs back to back, and listened. However close you think that sounds, that's how close they sound. I'm not advocating for IR use. I'm not promising fantasies about IRs of session cabs making anybody sound like a Nashville session player. I'm not even saying they sound good. I am saying that if I ever need to use them, they'll apply this frequency response to the end of my chain as a final filter before my signal goes to front of house or Pro Tools, and that when measured, these cabs with these speakers and these mics in these positions apply that same frequency response before their signal goes to front of house or Pro Tools. And however close you think that sounds, that's how close they sound. So JT didn't use IRs. Tom doesn't use IRs. I don't even use IRs. But I made these, so... Hopefully you'll join me in the future for more videos.